I stared at my reflection in the mirror, smoothing down my black designer dress. Not the kind you buy at a department store, but the kind that speaks of corner offices and board meetings. The invitation to Anderson & Co.'s 30th anniversary gala sat on my vanity, its gold lettering catching the light. The same company where my father had worked for 25 years, climbing from junior accountant to senior partner. The same company he'd told me I'd never be good enough for. "You're too soft for business, Emma," he'd say, shaking his head whenever I mentioned following in his footsteps. "Leave the real work to your brother Michael." My phone buzzed. Speak of the devil. Dad's name flashed across the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. "Emma." His voice was sharp like it always was when he talked to me. "I heard you're planning to attend the company gala tonight." I took a deep breath. Yes, I received an invitation. From who? The suspicion in his tone was unmistakable. Does it matter? I kept my voice neutral, professional. 5 years ago his tone would have made me stammer and apologize. Not anymore. "Listen carefully," he said. "You're not welcome at the company party. This is for Anderson & Co. employees and important clients only." "Not." He paused and I could practically hear the sneer, "Whatever it is you're doing these days." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. If only he knew what whatever actually meant. "I understand perfectly, Dad," I said calmly. "Have a good evening." I hung up before he could respond, something I'd never have dared to do before. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. The one who'd left home 5 years ago with nothing but a business degree he'd dismissed as useless and determination he'd called stubbornness. My assistant Sarah knocked on my office door. Yes, my office on the top floor of a building my father had no idea I owned. "Everything's set for tonight," she said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "The papers will be signed at midnight. Anderson & Co. won't know what hit them." I nodded, picking up the invitation again. 5 years of careful planning, of building my own company from scratch, of making strategic acquisitions while keeping my name out of the headlines. 5 years of watching my father promote my brother despite his mistakes, of hearing about family dinners I wasn't invited to, of being the daughter they pretended didn't exist. And tonight at the grand Anderson & Co. anniversary gala, everything would change. Because while my father was busy telling me I wasn't welcome, he had no idea that as of midnight, I wouldn't just be attending his company's party. I would be owning it. The takeover had been months in the making. Quiet purchases of shares, private meetings with board members, carefully orchestrated negotiations with their biggest client, Maxwell Industries. My father, so confident in his position, hadn't even noticed the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Your car's ready," Sarah said, breaking into my thoughts. "And Mr. Maxwell confirmed he'll make the announcement at midnight." I stood up, smoothing my dress one last time. "Perfect. Let's give them a party they'll never forget." As my driver pulled up to the Anderson & Co. building, I could see the celebration in full swing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, champagne flowed freely, and the city's business elite mingled in their finest attire. I took one last deep breath, grabbed my clutch and stepped out of the car. It was time to crash my father's party and his world. Walking into the office that morning, 6 hours before the gala, I couldn't help but remember the first time I'd stepped into Anderson & Company. I was 12, it was "Take Your Child to Work" day, and I'd been so excited to see where my father spent his days. I'd worn my best dress, a blue cotton thing with a Peter Pan collar that I thought made me look professional. How naive I'd been. "Emma, sit quietly and don't disturb anyone," Dad had instructed, parking me in a corner of his office with some coloring books. Meanwhile, Michael, only 2 years older than me, got to sit in on meetings, was introduced to clients, and was treated like a future executive in training. That day set the tone for the next 15 years. Every achievement of mine was dismissed, every ambition discouraged. When I graduated top of my class in business school, Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Book smarts aren't everything, Emma. Michael has real business instincts." The same Michael who had lost the company 3 major clients in his first year as junior partner. I walked through my own office now, running my fingers along the sleek mahogany desk. The view of downtown Manhattan stretched out before me, the Anderson & Co. building visible from my window. 5 years ago, I'd stood on the street looking up at that building, tears streaming down my face after another family dinner where I'd been told I wasn't cut out for the business world. "You're too emotional," Mom had said, not unkindly but with that patronizing tone she'd perfected over the years. "Maybe you should look into teaching or social work. Something more suitable." That night I'd made a decision. If my family wouldn't give me a chance, I'd create my own. I withdrew my entire savings, $50,000 I'd squirreled away from summer jobs and careful investing, and started my own consulting firm. For the first year I worked out of a tiny office above a Chinese restaurant, taking any client I could get. But I had something my family never expected. A vision. While Anderson & Co. stuck to traditional consulting methods, I saw the future in sustainable business practices and digital transformation. I hired young, hungry talents who others overlooked. We took chances, innovated, and most importantly, we delivered results. Sarah walked into my office, holding a tablet with our latest acquisition reports. She'd been with me since the beginning, the first person to believe in my vision. "The numbers are final," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We now control 48% of Anderson & Co.'s shares. The deal with Maxwell Industries tonight will give us the controlling interest." I nodded, pulling up the documents on my computer. The last 5 years flashed through my mind, the late nights, the risks, the careful planning. I'd built my company, Wilson Consulting Group, into a powerhouse while keeping my name out of the press. My father, so convinced of his own importance, never bothered to check who was quietly buying up his company's shares. "Mr. Maxwell called again," Sarah continued. "He's looking forward to tonight. Said he can't wait to see their faces when they realize who's been behind everything." James Maxwell, CEO of Maxwell Industries, had been Anderson & Co.'s biggest client for 20 years. He'd also been increasingly frustrated with their outdated methods and resistance to change. When I'd presented my vision for the future of consulting to him 6 months ago, he'd been immediately interested. "Your father never mentioned how brilliant you are," he'd said during our first meeting. "My father doesn't know," I'd replied simply. Maxwell had laughed, a deep, genuine laugh. "Oh, this is going to be interesting." Looking at the clock, now 2 p.m., I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. In 10 hours, everything would change. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a photograph, the only personal item in my office. It showed a 12-year-old me sitting in my father's office, beaming at the camera with hope and admiration in my eyes. That girl believed her father hung the moon. That girl thought if she worked hard enough, proved herself enough, she'd finally earn his approval. "Emma." Sarah's voice pulled me back to the present. "The dress is here." I looked up to see 2 assistants wheeling in a garment bag from Oscar de la Renta. Another small victory. The dress cost more than my father's first year's salary at Anderson & Company. "The hair and makeup team will be here at 5 o'clock, Sarah continued, checking her tablet. "Car service at 7:30. Mr. Maxwell will arrive at 11:45, and the announcement is scheduled for midnight exactly." I stood up, walking to the window. The Anderson & Co. building seemed to gleam in the afternoon sun, unaware that its entire power structure was about to shift. "Sarah," I said, still looking at the building, "call legal. I want to review the paperwork one more time. Everything has to be perfect tonight." As Sarah left, I thought about the text I'd received from Michael this morning. "Dad says you're planning to crash the party. Don't embarrass yourself, sis. You've done enough of that already." Oh, Michael. Always so confident, always so wrong. Tonight would change everything, not just ownership of Anderson & Co., but the entire dynamic of our family. The thought made me smile. I had a few hours left before I needed to start getting ready. Time to make sure every detail was in place, every document prepared, every possible scenario accounted for. Because tonight, when the clock struck midnight, I wouldn't just be arriving at the party. I'd be taking over. The Anderson & Co. building lobby was transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and the air hummed with classical music and the murmur of Manhattan's elite. I stood outside for a moment, watching through the glass doors as waiters weaved through the crowd with champagne flutes. My driver opened my door. "Good luck, Ms. Wilson." The doorman's eyes widened slightly as I approached. The Oscar de la Renta dress had been worth every penny. Black silk that seemed to absorb light, with subtle crystal beading that caught the eye only when I moved. Power dressing at its finest. "Invitation, ma'am?" I handed him the gold embossed card, watching his face carefully. No recognition, good. Despite my company's success, I'd kept my photo out of the press, using an old trick I'd learned from studying female CEOs. Let them underestimate you until it's too late. The grand staircase offered a perfect view of the party below. I spotted my father immediately, holding court near the bar. He was wearing his favorite Armani suit, the one he'd bought to celebrate making senior partner. Mom stood beside him, laughing at something one of the board members had said. Michael was there too, trying too hard to look important in a group of junior executives. Champagne, miss. A waiter appeared at my elbow. I took a glass, using it to hide my smile as I descended the stairs. The first person to notice me was Janet Chin, one of the board members I'd secretly met with months ago. Her eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her composure. Smart woman, it's why I plan to keep her on after the takeover. Emma. My mother's voice cut through the crowd. She was staring at me, her perfectly maintained smile slipping. What are you doing here? Hello, Mother. I took a deliberate sip of champagne. Lovely party. I thought I made myself clear. My father appeared, his face darkening. You're not welcome here. Several heads turned our way. Perfect, let them watch. Actually, Dad, I have an invitation. I held up the envelope. Quite a legitimate one, in fact. Impossible. Michael stepped forward, his usual smirk in place. Only employees and major clients received invitations. Is that so? I raised an eyebrow, enjoying the moment. How interesting. Before he could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. James Maxwell had arrived, right on schedule. At 11:45 p.m. exactly, just as planned. James. My father's anger vanished, replaced by his client-pleasing smile. So glad you could make it. Maxwell, imposing in his custom suit, scanned the room until his eyes found mine. He smiled, not at my father but at me. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Robert. Quite a night for celebrations, isn't it? My father preened, obviously thinking Maxwell was referring to Anderson & Co.'s anniversary. 30 years of excellence. And with the new contracts we've been discussing. Ah yes, about those contracts. Maxwell checked his watch. Perhaps we should wait a few minutes. I believe there's an announcement coming that might change things significantly. The confusion on my father's face was priceless. Announcement? I didn't authorize any announcements. No, Maxwell agreed pleasantly. You didn't. The next 15 minutes were quiet chaos for my family. I could see them trying to figure out what was going on, glancing nervously at Mr. Maxwell while pretending everything was fine. Mom's hand trembled as she sipped her champagne. Michael kept pulling at his collar like it was choking him. At 11:58, Sarah walked over to me and whispered, "Everything's ready." I nodded and stepped toward the center of the room. Right on time, Mr. Maxwell tapped his glass. The sound echoed through the room, silencing the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and calm. "As the biggest client of Anderson & Co. for the past 20 years, I've seen this company grow. But tonight begins a new chapter." I saw my dad's smile freeze. He sensed something was wrong. As of midnight, Maxwell continued, Anderson & Co. will have a new owner and a new CEO. He paused as everyone started whispering. "Let me introduce your new CEO and majority shareholder." The big grandfather clock in the lobby began chiming. With each bell I took a slow step forward. My family's faces shifted, from confusion to shock to horror. Miss Emma Wilson. Mom's champagne glass slipped and shattered on the floor. Gasps filled the room. Dad's face turned pale. Michael looked like someone had punched him. Board members were already checking their phones, reading the news alerts that had just gone out. "This can't be real," Dad finally said. You can't do this." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I already did. Want to see the proof?" Sarah walked up with a leather folder. Inside were all the documents. Legal papers, share purchase records, board votes, contracts. Everything was real. Everything was mine. Michael stared at me. "Wait. Wilson Consulting Group? That's you." I smiled. "Yes, Michael. The same company you said was a joke. The one you said would never go anywhere. It's now the fastest growing consulting firm in the country. And it owns this company." As the clock finished its final chime, I stood in the very room where I was once made to feel like I didn't belong. I felt proud but also a little sad. This moment was everything I had worked for. But it also meant closing the door on my family as I knew it. So, I said, standing tall, should we talk about the future of Anderson and Co? Or should I say, I paused, Wilson Global Partners? The next morning, I arrived at the office, now officially Wilson Global Partners, at 7 a.m. sharp. The security team, already informed about the leadership change, greeted me respectfully as I entered. My heels clicked against the marble floors. I noticed leftovers from last night's party, an empty glass, a dropped canopy. I took the executive elevator straight to what used to be my father's corner office. Sarah and her team had worked overnight to transform it. The dark wood furniture was gone, replaced with modern glass and steel. Old paintings had been replaced with digital screens showing live business data and global market news. Good morning, Ms. Wilson, Sarah said, handing me a coffee. Your father and brother have been in the conference room since 6. I smiled, remembering my father always saying, the early bird gets the worm, Emma. Not that you'd understand. If only he knew how many early meetings I'd had while secretly building my empire. How many employees are here so far? I asked as I sat down. About 30. We sent out the official memo at 5 a.m. Social media is already blowing up. I opened the news apps on my tablet. The headlines were exactly what I expected. Emma Wilson shocks business world with surprise takeover. Wilson Consulting Group buys Anderson and Co. Daughter becomes CEO in stunning power move. Your mother called 4 times, Sarah said quietly. I'm not surprised, I said, sipping my coffee. Any updates from the board? All but 2 are supporting the transition. Janet Chin has been especially helpful calming the nervous shareholders. I nodded. Everything was going exactly as planned.